5. Hey, what's up? What's up? Here we are. I always feel I have to lower my chair now because no, Fran, leave it up. There. No, I feel like that's better.
You're doing full-time teletherapy. I noticed throughout the day, I'm getting shorter and
shorter. Get shorter and shorter. Yeah, right now I feel like this is really awkward feeling. All right, whatever.
I have a new appreciation for a good chair. So.
I know. Seriously. So what's up? What's up? Happy Saturday afternoon to all. As always, we like to wait a couple minutes to let everybody get in the room and get situated and comfortable. Grab some bites on the counter. We're excited to be here. We got a great conversation for you today. As always, say hello. Let us know you're here. Let us know where you're from. Let us know. We have
interesting. It says everyone can see and hear me on my screen. Wow, that's a lot.
We got Ivy. Hey, Ivy. I hope you're feeling better. Eric. Hi, everyone. Here comes everyone. Oh, it's Crystal from Dallas. It's super rainy here, which is awesome. I love rainy days. Anybody else love rainy days? I like not too many rainy days, but I think 1 or 2 is good. Mary in California. Dean. Hello, Dean. Yes, Ivy is from Virginia. We have Johan from Holland. Is it Johan? Probably from Holland. Hello from LA. Janelle, thank you for your time. You are putting it to deliver this content. Oh, you're welcome, Janelle. Matthew here. My friend Katie from Austin. Jennifer from Florida. Oh, Eric's from Houston. Cool, man. My hometown. Born and sort of raised until I was like 10. I don't know. Randy in Ottawa. Well. Thank you all. Ontario. Thank you all for tuning
in. Nice.
2 people from Canada. 3, Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia is gorgeous.
I so want to go there. And they've got a band from not far from there called the Great Big Sea, which was one of my favorite bands, actually.
I love Great Big Sea, right? I'm getting stuck on you. Right? That's their song?
They do a couple.
That's Great Big World.
Yeah. Great Big Sea is a kind of...
And that is a good song. I agree.
That is a good song. Yeah.
I knew they were great and big. I just didn't know what they were.
Great Big Sea's from Newfoundland, so they're Newfies. But
so close. We got tons of people. Hey, Thomas, good to see you. Nikolai, middle of the night in PH, right? PH.
Philippines?
PH Philippines?
If Where it's else? Middle of the night.
In the penthouse?
Or?
David Costa, Rush is a band.
Rush is the greatest band ever in the history of the world.
Oh, you had to bring up Rush.
He really
Thank you.
Rush.
I like that David guy, whoever he is. Thank you.
Yes, Newfoundland. Wow, we have an international audience. All right, well, it is 3 minutes. Wow, it's 2 a.m. So where's 12 hours from here?
It's got to be the Philippines.
That way.
We're keeping some people awake right now, and they
we are keeping people awake. We should probably
tomorrow.
I feel bad about this now. So my moral scrupes radar is going off.
Mel, we should probably
be operating the piece of equipment tomorrow, and they're going to make a terrible mistake because
it will be our fault that they stayed awake.
It'll be like 51% Patrick's fault, and at least 49% mine.
Mel Elizabeth just wrote, "I once accidentally received a signed copy of a Great Big Sea book," which is kind of awesome. Wow. We love Melanie. Melanie's in Canada too, and an IOCDF ambassador, and just a rad human being in general. Okay, let's get started. Oh, and Nikki, my girl from Dublin, who I'm going to come visit once we can move.
I love Dublin.
Dublin, Ireland in the house. All right. So first of all, thank you for joining us. It is just after 2 p.m. Eastern time, Saturday, May 16th. 2020. I had to look it up. So this is an OCD town hall on moral scrupulosity. We have 2 of my favorite people in the OCD community, myself and Jon Hershfield. So we're glad to be here with y'all today. Hey, Michael Schramm, how you doing, buddy? And hello from Belgium too. I'll be in Belgium shooting a movie next year. Well, hopefully. Anyway, we'll talk. So let me just get through. My name is Ethan. If you don't know me, I'm the National Ambassador for the International OCD Foundation, which simply means I have OCD and I represent the foundation. Those 2 go together. So quickly, let me get through some quick housekeeping so we can get to the important stuff. So this town hall is intended to serve as educational content. It is not intended to replace therapy. For treatment-related questions, please be sure to work with your local provider or contact a local clinician. The International OCD Foundation is not a crisis hotline and should not be used if you are in distress or feel unsafe. If you are in a crisis or are ever feeling suicidal or unsafe, please go to your local emergency room, call 911, or call the Suicide Prevention Hotline at 800-273-8255. Also, we always like to say, be respectful, be kind to others. More when we talk about more sensitive, if you will, topics. This is a public forum. This is being recorded. This will be broadcast later for people to replay. But at the same time, we like to keep as safe a space as possible. So please be kind and compassionate to your fellow viewees.
Your fellows.
And hi from Iran, Georgia. Hello. We really have an international audience today. This is very exciting. Let's get into some action here. Well, first of all, thank you all for being here. Thank you for tuning in wherever you are in the world. We're really grateful to have you here. This is fantastic. Let me introduce you to our phenomenal panelists. To my left, right, I'm to the side. There you go. Is the one and only Dr. Patrick McGrath, PhD, the licensed clinical psychologist in the state of Illinois, Michigan, and Missouri. Dr. McGrath specializes in the treatment of anxiety, OCD, and PTSD. Dr. McGrath has given numerous presentations on the treatment of anxiety disorders, OCD, and PTSD. He's the author or co-author, John, something similar than yours, of numerous peer-reviewed journals, articles, and also has authored a book on OCD called the OCD Answer Book and a Stress Management Manual. Don't try harder, try different, which I can attest to. It's a really good manual. It's still online, right? We'll put a link to it. Yeah. Okay, perfect. Dr. McGrath currently serves as the head of clinical services for NoCD, leading their teletherapy services across the United States to help people with OCD. He's also a lead psychologist at Amita Health, where he opened intensive outpatient, partial hospital, and residential treatment programs for anxiety disorder, OCD, and PTSD. Patrick is a member of the Scientific and Clinical Advisory Boards of the International OCD Foundation and a fellow of the Association for Behavioral and Cognitive Therapies and the president of OCD Midwest. So, Patrick, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Pleasure to be
here. I will now read John's bio very slowly to match the amount of time that just took.
One day I'll have enough accomplishments that you could read it quickly. It'll be about the same length.
Where Jon Hershfield, not a doctor, is a psychotherapist. That was low. I'm sorry. Is a psychotherapist
on target.
Okay, is a psychotherapist in Maryland and the director of the OCD and Anxiety Center at Shepherd Pratt. He is the author of Overcoming Harm OCD and When a Family Member Has OCD, and co-author of the Mindfulness Workbook for OCD and Everyday Mindfulness for OCD. So if he's writing a book and everybody wants to guess what the last word of his book is going to be, it's most likely OCD. He is also a fine collector of doors. If you look behind him, he's got 4 of his favorites.
Many doors, yes.
Yes, many doors. So without further ridiculousness, Ethan, Ben Harris from Illinois saved your life in the rain in DC. Oh my God. Hey, Ben, what's up? So we got to go. But long story, at the DC conference, I tripped on a grate because there's no you people, it was raining and I tripped and I almost died and he saved my life. What's up, dude? Good to see you, Ben. Okay. Anyway, tangent for 200, Alex. So thank you all for being here. We'll be discussing moral scrupulosity today. As always, we like to start with some basic intros and just ask some questions of Patrick and John, and then we will move to your questions. We will be answering a lot of your questions, so feel free to start asking away. In the next 15 or 20 minutes, we'll start answering them. But first, I'll start with Dr. McGrath. So why don't you just quickly define for us what is moral scrupulosity?
Well, for this today, think about this differently from religion. All right. Many people consider religious scrupulosity the idea, what if I've offended a higher power or something of that nature? Today, what we want to focus more on is this idea of what if I've done something morally or ethically that might have offended someone? Or what if I'm afraid I might have done something like that, right? Again, I always define OCD kind of terms in that what if kind of paradigm, and the concern that maybe someone will be angry at me maybe they won't like me, they might judge me. What if I then judge myself for having been judged by other people? Or how will I look at myself now that I maybe have done something that could have been offensive to someone, which goes against the character that I would like to have, and now I have to think of myself in a different way? So any kind of rabbit hole that someone could go down that would kind of get them to question who they are, their character, in kind of this moral or ethical sense is how I look at it. And Jon, I know you've done a lot in this area as well too. And let me just say, for those of you who haven't been to the talk Jon and I do at the IOCDF, we firmly believe it is the best talk at the IOCDF conference. I just want to throw that out there right now.
It was so well attended 2 years in a row. It was a fire hazard both times.
Yes, it was.
People could have died. It was amazing.
Yeah, which we were morally questioning, should we do the talk? But we did it anyway because we're not good role models for morals, basically, is what it is. But
well, we spent the first half of the talk discussing whether or not we had anything to disclose, which I think is just a great way to kind of build up our CE credibility. I agree with everything that Patrick said in terms of defining moral scrupulosity. The only thing I would add is that sometimes it's not about something that you've done. It's also just about your general quality, your general identity as a moral person. So in the same sense that a person with checking OCD might really struggle to feel like a door is fully locked or a stove is fully off, and so they have to keep going back and checking that it's been completed, you can apply that to the moral landscape, which is this idea of like, I'm not a good enough person, and everything that's not going my way might be a sign, might be evidence that I'm a bad person and that there's something I'm supposed to do. Maybe I need to confess more or apologize more or ask for more reassurance that I haven't offended or collect more evidence that I'm being 100% perfectly honest in every move that I make. So that's just one thing that I wanted to add to that. It's this idea of this constant striving for perfect morality and this difficulty sitting with the truth of all things, which is, there's uncertainty everywhere and you're not perfect. And you may make moral missteps in life, or you may never know for sure which of your missteps are really missteps. And learning to live with that is part of just being human.
I like learning when we do these because as I'm listening to you, I'm realizing that I have a ton of moral scrupulosity. and I don't know, getting into this, I was thinking religious, and I don't think I ever separated despite years of I don't think I ever, because I know for me, especially when it comes around work and it's really important topics or information or things where something I've been working hard on that something big is riding on, I will really worry after I send that email that I didn't say anything, that I offended somebody, that I said the wrong thing, that I pissed them off, that I pissed them on, whatever it is. And I will, and so I guess some of my compulsions around that, I'll go back and read the email over and over again until I feel comfortable with it, that I haven't said anything, inappropriate. But I think that's what you guys are alluding to. I'm not saying it's the only, but I know that's something that I do, especially around work-related things.
Yeah, another good way to think about it is that religious scrupulosity, as Patrick had referenced, is this fear of offending God. But in moral scrupulosity, everybody is your God, right? Society is the God that you're afraid of offending. The rules and our rules in society that's the thing you're afraid of blaspheming against.
Well, and Jon and I chatted this morning, and I loved something Jon said in our phone conversation was moral scrupulosity can underlie all other forms of OCD. So if I leave the stove on and the house burns down, I'm ethically responsible if the cat died, right? Or shouldn't I have just done more? And maybe that's a checking thing, and maybe that's a perfection thing, but maybe morally I'm bound to do these things as well too. And if I don't, what does that say about me that I didn't fulfill that thing to do?
Well, go ahead, Jon.
Well, I just piggybacking on that, I see very few contamination OCD clients whose contamination is really about health, or even, disgust is a common one as well. But the majority of contamination OCD clients that I see are framing their experience as, it would be wrong to. It would be wrong to touch this after not having washed my hands. Or it would be wrong to kind of keep going along with what I was doing when I had a thought that maybe I should go back and wash my hands again. So the concern is that it would be breaking some sort of moral code. Maybe it would be putting somebody at risk. Obviously, we're seeing a lot more of that now with COVID, right? And most of the OCD around COVID that I'm seeing isn't, I'm going to get sick. It's more of, I'm going to fail to be vigilant enough, and that's going to result not just in me getting someone else sick, but in me being a bad person. Like, I didn't do my civic duty. I didn't play the social distancing game perfectly. And then the kind of compulsive self-shaming that comes with that.
Because it doesn't have to be society or anyone else judging me. Sometimes my own judgments of myself are so harsh that I have to do everything right so that I, first of all, won't even have to judge myself in a negative way. Although when I have OCD, it's going to find negative ways to judge me anyway, but I have to do all I can to limit that as much as possible.
This is kind of mind-blowing. Like, I literally, like, I'm not messing around when I say I don't think I ever knew that this was, I always hear the word scrupulosity and immediately jump to religion. Or prayer of that nature. I probably should have talked to you guys before we did this, but and clearly I haven't been to either of your panels from the last 2 years, even though they were wonderful.
Obvious,
I did not contribute to the fire hazard because I know what we were talking about if I'd been there. But no, I'm just like, it's quite remarkable because I think you're right. Well, obviously you're right. You're both clinicians and I'm a doofus actor, but I think there's almost, an interweaved theme going through of this, am I a bad or good person, regardless of the subtype, of it is, because there's always that inner critic and that judge kind of putting yourself on trial. And so there always is that sort of moral scrupulosity piece of whatever it is. So that really resonates and hits home for me for sure. You said earlier, Patrick, you brought up the word ethical, and I'm curious if there's a difference between moral and ethical scrupulosity.
Well, I mean,
or versus, I guess.
I think that you can have your personal morals, and then you might also have, let's say, ethics that you follow in certain organizations or something. Like there's ethical principles. And say, for example, the American Psychological Association has ethical principles. Well, I might then consistently wonder, did I violate one of the ethical principles, right? I'm not supposed to have dual relationships, but I saw one of my patients at the grocery store and they said hi to me and we had a 2-minute conversation. Did that go across a boundary that we're not supposed to do? So there's my personal way that I look at the world and kind of the values that I have, or which can raise up to be the morals that I have for myself as I see it. But then there's also kind of institutional ethical principles that we're supposed to follow, that we've said, these are the ways to do things. These are the best things for the law to make sure that we don't get in trouble or things of that nature. And in either of those, there's a way with OCD that I could doubt if I followed them the right way.
Jon, anything to add?
I see a lot of moral scrup clients who struggle both with issues of the past, like maybe I cheated on my SATs or wasn't perfectly honest in my tax form or something like that, and just spending years later, just spending a lot of time ruminating over the idea, trying to check to see if they can remember what they did, or to see if they can frame what they did in a way that's more tolerable for them than what the OCD is saying. And then also, I mean, I experienced this a lot, actually, this idea that the other shoe's going to drop, right? Like things are going well, but I'm going to get found out eventually. As you pointed out, I'm not a real doctor, right? So like someone's going to catch me, doing something that I'm not supposed to do. Perfect example of this. I'll always remember this. I got a letter in the mail. This is when I was in California, from the Board of Behavioral Sciences. And, that they're the licensing board for my license. And I remember looking at it and thinking, oh man, this is it, right? Someone's filed a complaint. I've done the wrong thing in some way. I'm in big trouble, But then I had to go see a client. I didn't have time to deal with it. So then an hour later, I come back to it and I'm like tearing it open, like, oh no, what is this? What is this? And it's just the letter asking me to renew my license. It's like literally the opposite of bad news. But that way of thinking that I might be contaminated and I just haven't been informed yet, and I need to be spending a lot of time thinking about this. I might be morally contaminated somehow. I see that in a lot of my Scrup clients, and I also experience it.
That makes a ton of sense. I'm processing and trying to moderate at the same time because I'm thinking about all the things that I've done or did do or whatever. And now I can worry about making the doctor joke in front of Jon and that he hates me. I'm a terrible person. So I'm telling everyone now, I will not email Jon until Wednesday of next week.
The thing is, I'm going to be thinking about whether or not I'm teasing you back too hard and actually giving you a complex about it, and that's not what I want either. So
good. I feel terrible. How could you do that to me? So we've touched on, moral versus ethical. We've touched on like, what if I'm a bad person? I have to be better than others to be their equal. What does that mean? I have to be better than others to be their equal.
So I talk to my patients all the time about this, that it's fine for you to be here and that's acceptable, but I have to be here in order to be acceptable. Like I have to do better than you to be equal to. If I did what you did, I would judge myself negatively. And I often call this in my Don't Try Harder, Try Different talk, I call it specialness, right? The rules of the world apply to me differently than they do to everybody else. It's fine for you to do that, and I would never judge you for doing it, but were I to do it, it would be an awful, horrible thing, right? And so when we live that way, it's really hard to function in society, because how do you live with two different sets of rules, one for yourself and one for everybody else? And if you're not going to follow the rules for everybody else, where is your limit? How good do you actually have to be, and moral do you have to be in order to be a truly moral person when everyone else is moral here, right? So there's no ceiling effect going on in that situation.
Yeah, it's the same thing as washing your hands too much too. I mean, you're looking for that buffer of if everybody's supposed to be this moral and I've somehow convinced myself that I'm now this moral, then any kind of wiggle room that happens there, it will be in the safe area, right? So if we're supposed to wash our hands for 20 seconds, but I do it for 20 minutes, then I'll know for sure that I'm clean. But of course, that metaphor, to continue with that metaphor, you wash your hands too much, you end up stripping all the healthy oils from your hands and making you more prone to infection. You do this moral scrupulosity thing too much, you end up in a state of constant self-criticism. And what is the point of being moral if you don't get to enjoy being a member of society at the end of it?
It's a great point. I kind of, not that this is scrupulous, but I kind of do that with fallibility and humanity in the sense that I hold myself to a higher standard, and I don't ever feel that I'm allowed to show a weakness or have a hard day, or, I always feel like I need to be Superman. I work really hard at my advocacy to show as much transparency as possible, but it's super uncomfortable. And especially in my, interpersonal life and with other people, like I always try to be, I see myself and I see my weaknesses or maybe things that I don't like about myself as way uglier than I think they are, or than they actually are.
Yeah, that's a great example. I had a patient once say to me, it was my last session of the day, and they just unloaded a whole bunch of stuff. It had been really tough, some of the stuff they were going through. And at the end of the session, they said to me, I'm really sorry I told you all that. I'm sure it's going to bother you all night and you're going to be thinking about it. And I looked them in the eye and said, actually, I'm not going to think about it at all. I'm going to go home and I'm going to make dinner, and then I'm going to work out and I'm going to watch some TV and I'm going to go to sleep. And then when I come back tomorrow, I'll be rested and well ready to help you even more. But if I went home tonight and I thought about everything you just told me, I would be up all night. I wouldn't sleep. I would just consternate and worry. And then I'd be a wreck tomorrow. So in order for me to be good to you, I'm going to just kind of put aside everything that you told me. And they looked at me like, how awful and horrible. And I just let them sit with that I wasn't going to try to explain it. We eventually addressed it later on when they said, I know why you said that now. I said, good, I wanted you to see that. But there are so many people who kind of just are so afraid of that notion that even in therapy, if I tell my therapist this, is that too much for my therapist? And now what have I put them through? And what a horrible patient I am that I've now put this on my therapist, and they have to think of this for all night long.
I'm way more selfish than that. I'm like, oh my God, what will they think of me? I don't worry about their lives. I'm like, oh my God. I've said things to my therapist in the past, and like I go home, I've worried for 3 or 4 days that, that like God knows what they think of me now. She thought I was this, great guy, and now I'm this horrible human being that should be, locked in a chest.
I used to try to get my therapist to write things down. That's how I knew I was really getting my money's worth. I would just say something audacious, and she'd be like, yeah. I must have said something really awful.
No, but I mean, it's also very cool because, I mean, what we're talking about is very mental, but, just being willing to live with the uncertainty that you're any of those things that you're afraid of, and anybody's going to judge you, and that, being okay, not being okay with that and moving forward is ultimately how you cope.
I think people get too caught up in this issue of standards too, right? I'm holding myself to this higher standard, and I don't want to hold myself to a lower standard. That sounds bad, right? To hold yourself to a lower standard, but that's just one way of looking at it. I mean, what it would really mean to hold yourself to a lower standard if you have moral scrupulosity is that you would take better care of yourself, that you would be more self-compassionate, that you would be more psychologically flexible, and frankly, that you would spend maybe less time thinking about yourself, right? Thinking about yourself and your problems, and did I do this and did I do that, and freeing up some space to think about the people that you care about in the way that you really want to. So you're actually increasing your standard for living, for taking care of yourself, for taking care of your loved ones. But it means coming down a little bit from the scale of moral perfectionism.
Yeah.
And speaking, actually, there's actually a question about, I wasn't going to get to questions quite yet, but Eric, real quick, I'll just integrate Eric's question at 2:11 p.m. Fran. Eric, our friend from Houston, who incidentally loved your book, John. He posted, big fan of John's mindfulness workbook that
Great.
probably ends in OCD.
I
Eric,
forgot to mention I have the teen workbook for OCD comes
OCD,
out next year.
Yeah.
I thought it was the teen workbook for teens, but it's for OCD.
It's for OCD, yeah.
It's for OCD. So, Fran, at 2:11 p.m., Eric Broach asks, can you talk about how moral scrupulosity might overlap, intersect with just right perfectionism, OCD? Because you were talking about perfectionism, so I thought maybe we could incorporate his question. Pat, do you want to take this? Start.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it can absolutely overact, and sometimes I even wonder if some people, like you were saying, Ethan, that you maybe have a mindset of scrupulosity as religion, and I wonder if sometimes some therapists have a mindset of scrupulosity as religion. So if it's some kind of perfectionism like that, they don't think of it potentially as also, is there a moral scrupulous component because it's not religious? But I definitely will take a look at both of those areas to see what would it mean for you if you weren't perfect, and if it's a social judgment or evaluation, one thing, but if it's then I'm a bad person, or if it goes down that road, I'm definitely going to explore then that idea of some moral scrupulosity and that evaluative judgment, that self-judgment that they put on themselves, and what does that mean to them. So I think that there's a huge crossover between those things.
I think that also with just right OCD in particular, it comes in a couple of different forms, right? One is I need things to be a certain way, like I need things lined up symmetrically or something like that. And if I don't have it that way, I'm going to be uncomfortable forever. And then the moral component of that is if I allow for the fact that I might be uncomfortable forever, that's being very cavalier about my identity and about the kind of person I'm going to be in this world. It's kind of like throwing away my identity. Well, now I'm going to be uncomfortable forever. Like I don't care about myself, and it would be immoral to not care about myself. So I now need to fix this. And then the other kind is if I don't fix it, it has maybe like a magical thinking component to it. Maybe something bad will happen, and that's a kind of a slam dunk, right? It would be immoral to allow for the fact that maybe because I didn't move this 3 inches to the right, my mother got a disease, and to say, well, that's my OCD, or just ignore it, right? That's can be felt as a moral risk.
So for those of you that are, thank you, John. For those of you that are watching, please feel free to load in your questions. We're going to get to your questions very, very shortly in the next 5 minutes. I just have a few more questions that I hope you find helpful for Patrick and John. So then the ultimate question becomes, can anyone ever be a good person?
Well, probably not to
We
OCD
would take
standards.
that first.
Yeah. I'm a bad person, so I'll take it. I don't know that anyone would ever meet OCD standards of what a good person is. Like you wouldn't ever meet OCD standards for cleanliness or anything else. So
Right.
I think it depends on what the definition of a good person and what is defining that definition. OCD? No, you're not going to be a good person. Outside of OCD? Absolutely. I think you can absolutely be a good person.
Yeah, it really hinges on your definition of what good means. And the implication is that we're split up into good camps and bad camps, but that's not how humanity works. And I could ruin everybody's day here by just rattling off every historical hero that we have and explain to you how also, by the way, they were racist or adulterers or they believed in something that you found offensive. I'm not here to ruin your day, so I won't do that, but I could. Right. And that's the thing is when we divide ourselves into good and bad camps, instead of trying to understand ourselves in context, the way we try to understand others in context, that's where the OCD really flourishes.
So talk to me about mistakes. Are mistakes a sign or proof of a flaw?
No.
I think they're a sign of humanity is what they are. I mean, that's all they are to me.
A mistake is your attempt to do the right thing and then discovering after the fact that you were misinformed. I don't see a moral quandary there. I mean, many of my clients do. Like, oh, I made a mistake. I'm a terrible person. I should have paid more attention. I should have done this. I should have done that. But that whole thing hinges on this idea that you're in complete control over what thoughts, feelings, and conditioning put you in that place, which isn't true. So I always try to frame mistakes as, doing the best you can and then finding out that it didn't produce the results you wanted. And now the question is it a mistake you can fix, or is it a mistake that you have to let go?
Yeah. I like to say to people, the decision you make at any time you make the decision is the best decision to make at the time. And only after making the decision are you able to tell how well it worked or not.
I like that.
I like that too. And then it becomes hard to not judge yourself for making that decision and having compassion, and it kind of opens up. But you're right. Go ahead.
Well, just because that judgment is now based on the fact that you have more information than you did when you made the decision.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I've had clients that, riddled with shame over behavioral choices that they made when they were children, right? When they had a completely different brain, and parts of the brain weren't even online yet, and they were making sense of their world based on what was in front of them at that time. And now with their adult brains, they're looking back on it, they're going, well, why did I push that kid on the playground, or, step on that, ant or something like that? It's like, you're never going to answer that, get an answer to that question, but you should understand that trying to find the answer to that question is a serious problem, because you are not looking at it through an objective lens. You don't have the same brain that you had then, and you're never going to know what it was like to be that then. You only have the present moment, which means, as Patrick was alluding to, you can make a decision now to analyze it or not analyze it. But, 5 seconds later, you can make that decision again. But you have to do it in the present.
Go ahead, Patrick.
OCD is also angry at you for not owning a time machine. Right? That's what it would like. It would like you to own one so that you can go back and undo any bad, quote unquote, decision you've ever made, so that then it will... You'll be this wonderful, awful, or wonderful, awesome kind of person.
Of course, then the problem would be you get back, wonder if you actually undid it correctly, and go back and do it again.
That is correct.
And then you break your time machine.
There's the quandary.
Your mom and ruin everything, right?
Yeah.
That's a lot.
There's the quandary, Ethan. Exactly.
So, that is definitely the quandary. So, before we jump to some questions, if anybody is wondering, so what are some examples of mental rituals associated with moral scrup? Can I use the abbreviation, or do I have to say scrupulosity?
Yeah,
you have to call it MoScrew.
MoScrew.
That's awful.
But we'll continue to call it Moral Scrupulosity.
We have people in Denmark. We can't say that.
So a mental ritual, right, it's a behavior, it's a compulsion, it's a behavior you're engaging in to reduce your distress by trying to get certainty that your fear won't come true. Even if it's about the past, it's still trying to get certainty that the revelation that what you did was bad won't ruin your life moving forward. So mental rituals would be all of those mental strategies that we engage in. So the top one, of course, is just rumination, right? Just trying to play back the tape as if it was evidence, like we were just talking about, and replaying events in your head to try as if you were studying them to get information that you didn't already have, and that you were somehow going to have this eureka moment that's really never going to come, where you're like, oh, now it makes sense. Now I definitely didn't do the wrong thing, or I know the exact wrong thing that I did, and I know how to fix it. So mental review is definitely the biggest one. But another one that comes up a lot that people forget is a ritual is self-criticism itself, right? One thing people with OCD, and putting myself in this camp, really have a hard time with is unevenness, right? Is letting things be uneven. I'm not just talking about symmetry OCD. I mean, if I did something wrong and I haven't paid a price for it, that is incredibly uncomfortable. So if I can punish myself, if I can sentence myself to, 6 months of being miserable and know that I at least did that, then if the thing I'm worried about is true, I will have served my time. And so there's an evenness there. Getting away with it and living the rest of my life as a moral fugitive is something that's very, very difficult to consider, even though that's what you should try to do. That would be your exposure. So self-criticism itself can be a major mental ritual. Patrick, you want to maybe name
Well,
it?
and I would say also goes back to then that idea that am I living in the imposter syndrome, right? Am I one day going to be caught then for the thing that I have suddenly hopefully been getting away with for all these years? But I'm always looking over my shoulder constantly thinking that there's the moral police that are just on my tail. They're a block away all the time. And I'm always having to run away from them, you know?
Yeah. Thought neutralization is another common one. I mean, you see it in all forms of OCD. It's like, so I have a bad thought and then I just try to replace it with a good one, right? So I have a thought, I hope my mom dies. And then I might think healthy, 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 or something like that to try to block out that thought. That would be a pretty classic example of a mental ritual.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Pat.
And then you could easily see where sometimes there might be some crossover into religious scrupulosity as well, too. So maybe if I've done this moral or ethical bad thing, then I might say a prayer to have some external help assist in the whole process as well, too. So there can be some fuzzying of the lines then between the two types of scrupulosity going on.
One thing go ahead, John.
Well, just gonna say the sort of the fuzziest one there is the idea that the thought itself is immoral. So the immoral act is that I had an immoral thought,
right?
And I need to clean myself of that, which then leads to all these rituals.
What I have noticed,
the thought action fusion is amazing in this experience. So,
what I have noticed is, as I've just in my own work personally embraced a lot of self-compassion work, I've noticed the scrupulosity piece kind of dwindle away just because I'm learning to be less judgmental of myself. So therefore, I'm willing to make more mistakes or be more forgiving of myself or be a bad person or just, be okay, just being okay or being a B-. And so I've been able to notice some of the more scrupulous pieces kind of fading away.
That's great. I mean, I think it's just that's such an essential component to it, especially because, as we were saying before, the self-criticism and the self-punishment isn't just you being mean to yourself. It's also a compulsion, right? So when you stop compulsions, your OCD gets better. It just takes some time, right? So it doesn't feel good the first time you do it. You start to habituate to it. You can recondition yourself to play fair, to treat yourself the way you would treat somebody you really cared about.
Absolutely. And it speaks to the power of not just, obviously, ERP is the exposure response prevention is the gold standard, but, acceptance commitment therapy and dialectical behavioral therapy and some of the adjunct therapies that I've used have really made a big difference. And self-compassion, which are all kind of interwoven into that stuff, has really helped with this specific thing. So let's get to some questions. We've got a lot of them. So thank you for being patient. This isn't a question per se, but you don't need to put this up in case, but Ashley says, so thankful y'all are covering this topic. I'm struggling to get my garden in the ground because I feel guilty killing weeds in the way by pulling them up. So I mean that's a perfect example.
So the word scrupulosity comes from this root word that is scruples. Which actually means a small stone, right? So the emphasis in scrupulosity is you're getting caught on these small details. So in religious scrupulosity, where this idea first was looked at, it's you're taking this one like tiny piece of the Bible like way too literally and way too seriously, and it's making you miss the forest for the trees, right? So we look at that morally. Planting a garden is a good thing, right? It's good for the earth. It's good for your mental health. It's maybe you're producing your own food, or maybe you're going to be growing flowers that other people will see and delight in, and that's going to brighten their day, right? There's all this positivity happening in gardening, but you do have to tear up the earth and disrupt the homes of all of the bugs and worms and pull these weeds that, after all, are just fighting for their survival like any other plant. So everything you do that's worth doing is going to have that balance. So if you're going to be black and white about it, you don't get to have any fun in life. You can't do it, right?
Yeah. Well, and then how far do you take it? Do you say, well, I can't live in a house anymore because there used to be pasture where the house was, and so I bet a tree got dug up or some grass got dug up, and I can't drive anymore because what if I drive over a crack and there's a little weed coming up on one of the cracks and my car tire hits it and it destroys the weed? Maybe I shouldn't drive anymore. And how about food? Someone had to pull that carrot out of the ground and had to chop it up, and now I'm going to eat it, which I need to do to sustain myself. But where's the guilt? You can see the explosion that somebody could have in all of this with guilt and morality, and why it can just go to a point where I had a patient years ago who had read that there was one religion, the Jainism religion, where they sweep in front of them. So because in case there's a bug, they don't want to step on a bug and kill the bug, because maybe the bug has a soul and now you've killed something with a soul. So he wanted a broom, and when his parents wouldn't do that for him, he got in a wheelchair and wouldn't move unless his parents pushed him, because then if they ran over a bug, it was their fault, not his, for having stepped on one. So it's amazing how far this will go.
The very religious Jains also wear cheesecloth or something like over their mouth so they don't accidentally inhale any bugs. It's like, and that works for them, right? But it doesn't apply to a lot of us. And again, you're trying to do something that can't be done, right? Which is be perfect. You're trying to create a change without moving any atoms around. You can't do that.
Exactly. And one of the reasons I wanted to just bring up Ashley's statement is I wanted to validate it, because I think that with moral scrupulosity, religious scrupulosity, and any of the, sort of more mental compulsions, it can really be tormenting regardless of the content. I think that, even outside the OCD community, we know how stigmatizing it can be, but even inside the OCD community, without a lot of education, we can think, we don't realize that something like pulling up weeds can be just as tormenting as being afraid you're going to hell, or something that seems much larger in theory. So I just wanted to bring it up and validate and understand how tormenting I know that can be. So it's important to recognize that this stuff manifests in a variety of ways and is equally tormenting. We all wish we had somebody else's OCD, as Patrick and I were talking about.
On Wednesday night, we had that conversation. Boy, I wish I had that OCD. That'd be real easy to deal with.
That'd be really cool. Yeah, exactly.
I think for that person who's struggling with the weeds issue, I think some of it also has to do with thinking that the alternative to being morally scrupulous is to be bad, right? Is to be evil. That, like, if she's going to plant this garden, she has to pull up those weeds and be like, hate you, stupid weeds, and just throw them away. And like, that's not the kind of person she wants to be. So there's this quandary. How do I pull up the weeds? But that has to do with black and white thinking. There's a gray area there where she could pull up the weeds. That would be the exposure. And she could acknowledge that she's taking the life of something to do something that she wants. And that's part of the exposure. But she can also acknowledge that she has gratitude for the weeds, for them yielding to her and allowing her to plant this garden. She could pull them up, non-compulsively, not in some fancy way, but in a way that is still connected to her values. If what she values is sanctity for all living things, then she could pull it up and think about that while she does it. In the same way that a hunter might express gratitude for the deer yielding so that he could provide food for his family.
That's a great point. I was thinking, so I'm reading the comments, and apparently everybody also agrees with me. Like, yeah, I didn't know I had that too. Oh my God, that's me. So I'm glad I'm not the only one sitting here going, this is new. So
I want to give a shout out to people. So we didn't mention every kind of OCD. We talked about just right OCD and contamination OCD, and we're never going to be able to mention every kind of OCD, but sexual orientation obsessions often involve a lot of moral scrupulosity as well, I've found, because it's sort of like, if it's possible that I'm gay and I haven't proven otherwise, then it would be immoral to continue to string my wife along, because I might ruin her life, 10 years from now when I come out of the closet. Or relationship OCD often has this very strong moral component. It would be immoral to waste this person's life if I can't prove that I'm madly in love with them, 100% of the time. So those are other areas where the moral stuff kind of gets in there.
It'd be immoral for me to go to Christmas because there's children there. And what if suddenly I have an urge while I'm at Christmas, right? So the moral thing for me to do is to stay home and be away from my family.
Exactly. So I don't know if we can answer this question without more specifics, but Rita at 2:16 p.m. asks, this is her rephrase, how to do ERP for moral and religious OCD.
Well, I mean, I think let's use the last example that we had of you're going to pull up some weeds and you're going to sit with the difficult decision that it is to pull up the weed, and you will sit with some of the guilt that you're going to experience pulling up the weed, and you're going to allow yourself to have that feeling, and then you're going to build your garden, and you're going to have your garden, and you're going to allow yourself to enjoy the garden. But even though you're going to go into building the garden, maybe right now thinking, but the garden will always be a bit tainted because there will always been that one weed that was there that I had to pull up. And maybe it will. But as Jon was saying, do you like the garden 99%? No one has to like the garden 100%. There could be some kind of thing that you're just not satisfied with. And you know what? That's okay. Of course, OCD says it has to be 100%. So what do we do with moral scrupulous kind of exposures? Similar to what we do with everything else. We accept the imperfection, and we accept the fact that it's never going to be just right. And we allow ourselves to be okay with, I did something for the greater good in this situation, and I'm going to have to live with that.
That's great.
There's nothing about moral scrupulosity that makes it trickier, in my opinion, to treat. You might think that, assume that, oh, well, but it's all in my head, or, this is morals, different from germs. What do we do with ERP? We put people in situations where they're likely to be triggered or likely to encounter their triggers. And we want them to be a witness to the urge to compulse, so that they can resist that urge, so that they can send the signal to their brain that in the presence of this trigger, I don't compulse. That's it. That's pretty much all ERP really is. And so you just need to figure out for each individual that you're working with, what are the situations? So the person we were just talking about, the situation is gardening, right? So you're going to garden, and you're going to acknowledge that you're killing the weeds, and you're going to let that be a thing. And the real exposure is enjoying the gardening.
Yep.
Right? It's not limiting yourself from that enjoyment. And the real response prevention is blocking yourself from overly investing in guilt and shame and talking about what a bad person you are, and like crying to yourself about it. It's actually just letting yourself be flexible. Now, sometimes we push the needle a little bit to just kind of get people to really practice getting into that feeling. So the best exposures are the ones where they're actually also doing something that they value. But you can also do exposures that get you into this gray area that aren't necessarily connected to a value. Like, you get, back when we all left the house, you would go to McDonald's, you get your ketchup packets or something like that, right? You might take 3, even though you only need 2. But, that's wasteful and it's bad and it's moral, whatever. But that might be the right exposure for you. And just sitting with that, like, yeah, maybe that's a gray area, and maybe I owe McDonald's 5 cents, and maybe it's going to haunt me for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Oh my God! Go ahead, Patrick.
Oh no! What did I do now?
Ahead, Ethan. No, I'll come in after you.
No, I just remembered. Oh my gosh! I just remembered when all of this started. With everything, I went to the grocery store. This was like 2 months ago, and I brought my my recyclable bag in. And so I didn't have to push a cart back before we knew anything. I push a cart now, but and just put the stuff in there and had the mask on. I just realized, this is a true story, that I stole like a $28 bottle of vitamin E. Like, because the vitamins are expensive and they're huge. And I forgot to take it out of my bag and give it to the person to check. And I just walked out with it. So I'm sitting with that guilt, which clearly I've been sitting with it a long time because I just remembered it. But that was completely waste of time. Go ahead, Patrick.
That's awesome.
Well, I was going to say the other response prevention piece too.
Patrick's like, what I was going to say is,
no, I like the fact that you're sitting with that. I think that's a good experience for you. And in this garden piece, the response prevention piece might also be to actually do the garden and not, well, maybe I'll just find a community garden where someone else has already gotten rid of all the weeds and they were responsible for doing it. So I'll just join the community garden instead of doing my own thing. And you don't want the person doing that avoidance. You want to, build your garden, do the elimination of the safety behaviors. So very important to do.
I also did what's called a reframe, which is every time I use the self-checkout, I calculate how much of the checkout person's salary I should be getting to do their job. And then over the course of 8 years, I've earned the vitamins.
You've earned the $28 vitamins.
Done.
Like all kinds of OCD, the compulsions are not an improvement on the situation. The compulsions are the problem, right? So in moral scrupulosity, we often think that we're doing compulsions that make us more moral, But if you look at them, those behaviors actually are not more moral. And the example Patrick just gave of, let me just enjoy the community garden and let other people bear the burden of the guilt that they have of killing the weeds. Well, that's kind of immoral, right? Like, that's passing the buck, essentially. Like, you're not willing to do it, right? So it's important to look at all these strategies that you have to try to, get certainty that you're more moral, and not get confused into thinking that those are actually strategies to get more moral. They're just compulsions, and compulsions are eating away at your life. They're not adding any benefit.
We've got a ton of awesome questions here, so it is my commitment to you to plow through as many as we can and see if we can be perfect and get them all answered, or at least try. So quickly, I know this is a broad question, but Jessica at 2:18 p.m. asks, how do you do ERP for moral scrupulosity when a person is also deeply religious? She actually said resources, ? Any good resources that we can quickly shout out, or Fran can put a link to for this?
In terms of resources, usually the go-to book for religious scrupulosity is called The Doubting Disease, Joseph Karachi. And so that's an excellent book for understanding religious scrupulosity. I have a chapter in the mindfulness workbook on moral scrupulosity, and there's several blogs out there that discuss moral scrupulosity. I don't think there is a moral guidebook yet, but
Jon Hershfield's next book, Moral Scrupulosity Treatment for OCD or something. It has to end in OCD.
It has to end in OCD, yeah. But often, people derive a lot of their moral compass from their religion, right? So it's very common for it to be a crossover, right? If I allow for too much flexibility with my morals, that might be a sin. Depending on what the religion is and how you understand it. So that can be a very uncomfortable area. I think you always have to come back to, is the purpose of your religion to make you paranoid and miserable your whole life, or is it to actually guide you to leading a more joyful life? And if what you're doing under the guise of following these rules is making you miserable, either you don't understand the rules or you're doing them wrong, right? And unless you're willing to admit that the rules are set up, specifically to make you unhappy.
Well, there's also very religious people who enjoy life, which means they've figured out a way to be very religious and to see that they live a moral lifestyle so that they're not bothered by it. So you don't, if you're Catholic, have to be holier than the Pope in order to truly be a moral person, right? But that's where OCD wants you to go. So again, that idea that everyone else is here and I'm here, what if you just act like everybody else? Can we just get you to see who are some other people in your faith group, your church, whatever? Do you see them as moral people? What do they do that's different than you? And would you, as an experiment, or for us an ERP kind of thing, be willing to act like them and just see, is that good enough?
And I would add that compassion is really the greatest virtue. It cuts through all religions, all philosophies. And if you're not applying it to yourself, then you're abandoning something that's really important.
Thanks, John. Ben Rauscher at 2:21 p.m. The shame can be so hard sometimes if you're trying to make a moral decision, but can't make it even after a long time. Is there a way to deal with the shame in the meantime? Patrick?
Yeah, boy, I go back to, I worked with a guy, Gersh Kaufman, who did so much on shame. So I've always been kind of interested in shame. But one thing is just to, I would say, set a time frame is kind of very important. I remember shopping with someone once who was very afraid that if they got something that wasn't perfect, right? That like the perfect orange or the apple, that someone could get sick in their family, it would be their fault. And so you can see kind of that moral scrupulous piece to them. And so I went shopping with them and I had a timer and I set the timer for 1 minute and we had their list and we went to the apples and I hit the timer and I said, now here's the deal. You've got a minute to pick the apples. And if you don't, I'm picking the apples. And believe me, you don't want the apples I'm going to pick for you. I'm going to get the rottiest, moldiest apple I can find. And that's what you're going to be buying for your family. So helping people maybe first with a guide, but allowing someone to say there has deadline for some decision, because otherwise OCD will drag things out forever, always trying to find more information. Graduate students are familiar with this. Go to writing your dissertation. There's got to be one more resource that I can find for this. There's probably one more citation I can put in here, and you just have to come to a point where you say, I've got enough, now I have to move forward.
And John, if you want to add, so Bonnie asks as an addendum to Ben's question, as well as overwhelming guilt. So not just shame, but guilt as well.
Guilt is concern with the idea that you've done the wrong thing, and shame is concerned with the idea that you are the wrong person, right? That you're a fundamentally bad person. So they can, go hand in hand. They're both inevitable. We experience them in life. Everybody feels guilt. Everybody feels shame. I mean, they're supposed to anyway.
There might be a few people.
There might be one or two that don't. But yeah, but I would say that means there's something wrong with that person's brain. You're supposed to feel guilt and shame sometimes, not because it serves any real function, but it's just the body's natural way of responding to that specific threat of you might have done a bad thing or you might be a bad person. So the first thing I would recommend doing is just acknowledge that it's a body state like anxiety. Where do you feel the shame? Is it a heaviness in your chest? Is it something in your stomach or your shoulders? Where do you experience it? And can you make space for that? And just let it be what your body's doing in that moment without just sticking exclusively inside your head to like, what does it mean? What does it mean about me? What am I going to do about it? Try to get out of your head a little bit and just into your body and say, okay, I'm experiencing this thing called shame. On the more intellectual side of things, again, as I kind of mentioned this before, it's all based on confusion, right? I'm a bad person, or I did a terrible thing. And what you're really saying is I should have known better than to find myself in this present experience. But you cannot have known better. We could play it back 1,000, 1,000,000 times. You would end up in the exact same place because you're here as a product of your thoughts, which you don't control, your feelings, which you don't control, your sensations, which you don't control, and your conditioning over which you have a little control. And the only thing you have any real control over is right now what would be useful to do with your attention. And it's probably not, grind yourself into the shame as hard as you can until it hurts the most that it can. It's probably something like make space for it. Yes, it's painful. That's tough. How would you treat a friend who was feeling really burdened by guilt and shame? Yeah. Treat yourself that way.
Always my favorite go-to is that, for sure. I think that if we could just take a look at the fact that we are so good to other people, and yet we're not that good to ourselves, and we started to be as good to ourselves as we were to other people, we'd see a lot of people get better really quick.
Yeah, that's a great point. There's I was just going to say two things, but no, that is so true, Patrick. It's like sometimes if I forgot what book I read it in, but simply put, if our inner voice or our inner critic was a salesperson, or was a friend of ours that treated ourselves like we were treating ourselves. So like my inner voice beats the crap out of me every day. Yet I keep going back to it and I'm like, you're right. And I keep listening to it. And then I'm like, well, if that was a friend talking to me, would I keep wanting to be best friends with him? No, of course not. I'd kick him out of the room. But because so go ahead, John.
I was just thinking, it's funny, some of the most compassionate things I might say to myself, if you saw them written down, they wouldn't sound very compassionate, but it's understanding them in context. So I might, with a certain affection, tell myself, shut up, right? I'm doing a ritual. I'm giving myself a hard time about a mistake. I'm telling myself, oh, it was so stupid. You should have known better. What's wrong with you? And then I'm like, shut up, right? And I mean that as an act of self-compassion, which is, you don't need to do this to yourself right now. This is just your conditioning. This is a habit that you have. Quiet down. It's all right. Because we do that with our friends too sometimes, right? We might punch them in the arm or something and kind of tease them a little bit when they're being hard on themselves. Cut it out. Come on. What's wrong with you? Let's go play play basketball or something, right?
Go ahead, John.
No, that's all I wanted to say.
But I also think, you talking about making space for it was really important, because if, reading Ben's question, and I think we get these a lot, and he may have not have meant this, but he's like, is there a way to deal with the shame in the meantime? I think a lot of times when we ask, when we say, is there a way to deal, what we mean is like, can we get rid of this? Do we have to feel this?
Right.
Like, is there a way for me not to feel this all the time, or when will it go away? And I'm not insinuating that, Ben, that's what you meant. You may not have meant that, but I know a lot of times when a lot of people ask questions, including myself, it's like, I don't want to feel this anxiety. I don't want to have this thought. How can you help me get rid of this? And I think so you talking about making space for it was really important.
Yeah, being able to just say, hey, look at that before everything. That's 99% of all mindfulness really is. It's saying, hey, look at that. Oh, hey, look at that. There's shame. Shame has shown up. For sure. I'm over here looking at the shame.
Fran, 2:22 p.m. Melena Dell, is this related to harm OCD? What are the differences between fear of harming and moral scrupulosity? I think we touched on this a little bit before. Go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, I mean, a little of, if that wasn't a bump and I ran someone over, not only might I get arrested and my family hate me and look at me and the public consider me a murderer or a hit and runner, but how will I ever just be able to be with myself, right? How will I be able to sit with myself ever again, knowing that I could have done something to help someone? And even if I've turned around 900 times already and it's never been a person, it's always been a bump, isn't that still the responsible thing to do as a moral person in life, just to be sure that I didn't do something that was wrong, right? And so you can see that crossover then of those two things.
That's great, Patrick. I'm going to keep going unless you have something. I will give, I think it's Rianne from the picture. You don't need to post this, Fran, but she says, I have contamination OCD, and I never would have connected moral scrupulosity to it, but how Jon framed it is exactly how I think and feel about my contamination fears. It's my responsibility to make sure I don't contaminate others. Doing so would be unbearable. I couldn't live with myself. So, so you live up to your non-PhD, Jon. So just under that, Fran, 225, our friend, the one to blame. I'll have to get your name at some point if you wouldn't mind sharing it. How do you go about ERP when moral scrupulosity makes you a better person? Is there a balance?
Jon, you want to take, because you touched on this a little earlier, Jon.
So well, yeah, I mean, I just, people will tell you that perfectionism, is responsible for their good grades, right? But that's not true either, right? If being detail-oriented and studying really hard is getting you good grades, then that's not perfectionism. If it's, going over all of your answers, checking your answers 1,000 times and not being able to finish the test because you got on a 10-question test, you answered 3 questions perfectly and then ran out of time, I'd say perfectionism is not making you better at school, right? So it's the same thing with moral scrupulosity. Your compulsions are not making you more moral. They might be making you feel more moral in the short term, in the same way that hand sanitizer makes you feel cleaner in the short term. But is it making you healthier? Right? Is it leading to the bigger picture of you navigating this life more compassionately towards yourself and others, or is it just putting you in your head more and scrupulously, for lack of a better word, trying to perfect every area of responsibility you can think of? So I disagree with the framing that it makes you a better person, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, think of the person, and we all know someone like this who, hey, what do you want to do tonight? Oh, anything. What time you want to get together? Anytime's good, right? Do you want to drive? You want me to drive? Oh, yeah, we both have cars, whatever works for you. What kind of food do you like? I like all kinds of foods. It's just, they will not commit to anything, because if they did and then you didn't like it, you'd blame them, and then they could just feel responsible, like I ruined your night for having chosen that restaurant or my driving or something. So though I may come off at the end of the night feeling like I made no moral bad decisions tonight, the reality is you made no decisions tonight and you put all the responsibility for everything on someone else. So you're passing the buck. I don't consider that you're more moral. I think that in a way that's kind of hiding, right? That's almost like I'm not going to be responsible for anything, and that's how I'm going to be moral. That doesn't make any sense, actually.
And I would have one more thing to that is all of the things that you do that are moral, that are driven by your OCD, meaning you check up on someone because you're obsessing about them and you're trying to make sure that they're safe, or you put something at the grocery store in the wrong aisle, and then you go all the way back to put it in the right aisle because you wouldn't want to put somebody out whose job it is to put things in the right place. You can do all of those things without the OCD. Right. To credit the OCD for your morality is not a good way to go about it. If you want to be a person who does a lot of good things, you can do that without obsessing, and you can do that without being certain.
Fran, you can actually post. She's 2 questions. Donna Stidham at 2:26 p.m. Asks, "How do I help him separate God from his OCD?" I will read you the initial question that she asks, but that's when I want Fran to post. Donna asks, "My son definitely does this thing where there are rules for him that don't apply to everyone else, especially on the religious front. How do I help him separate God from his OCD?"
Well, I wonder if his God has become his OCD in some ways. That, you know, OCD is telling you to do things that it sounds like no scripture has told you, no teaching has told you. So you're doing all of that only in service of OCD, not in service of God. You can fool yourself into believing that God wants this, but without any evidence of that whatsoever. The best evidence that we have is that you're doing this purely to satisfy what your obsessive compulsive disorder is telling you to do.
I would agree with that, and it reminds me of some of the conversations I've had with people recently about COVID and some of the over-the-top things that they're doing to try to stay safe that are not really part of the CDC recommendations. I say, you should be working for the CDC, not for the OCD, right? It's yes, sure, there are rules and you want to follow them, but the stuff that you're making up that are extrapolations of those rules, not only are they not the actual rules, but they cheapen the actual rules.
I am not. I'm literally going down the comments. I'm not making up for Jon's lack of doctorate. But Will Hayden says, "Dang, so cool that Hershfield is here. His work has helped me so much." Smiley face, a bit starstruck.
Oh, that's nice. Thank you.
Say thank you. His name is Will, Jon.
No, I was thanking you, and thank you too, Will.
Oh, okay, cool. Thank you, Will. Appreciate the. We always like to hear that you're happy to have our guests on. We like to bring them back. So if anybody has any kind things to say about Patrick, if you do,
probably not.
Feel free to weigh in. If you don't, make something up just so I have something to read later on.
Patrick is a pretty good person.
Especially if you go by his bio. It's
that's why my bio's so long, because nobody likes me.
Really
I had to like myself because no one else does.
Randy Schuster, Fran, at 2:26 p.m. Any tips? We touched on this a little bit, but any tips on how to lean into the accompanying guilt that arises when you resist compulsions around moral scrupulosity themes?
I would just encourage exactly that, leaning into it as a body state. So when someone's doing contamination exposures, we don't want them to try not to feel dirty when they do it. We want them to say, yeah, this is what it feels like to be dirty. We want the brain to be a witness to that dirty feeling and associate it with not washing, as opposed to associating it with always washing. So same thing with the moral scrup. You're doing an exposure. Presumably it's something that you've worked out with your therapist. Just like with harm OCD, we don't intentionally put people in dangerous situations. We put them in uncertain situations. So you've already come up with an exposure that is within your larger moral or ethical code, but it's close to the border and it makes you uncomfortable because you might cross the border, right? And then you get too close to the border and you start to feel guilty. And then we want you to experience that state, but don't try to undo it. Don't reassure yourself. Don't rationalize why it's okay. Just be in the presence of that feeling and wait. Habituation works because time is the thing that brings the distress down. And once your brain sees that, then your brain can remember, oh, the distress comes, the distress goes. I don't have to do compulsions to make it go.
I also, for people who feel this very bodily, that gut feeling or the muscle tension, I like to incorporate interoceptive exposures, which are exposures we use for panic, but to recreate on purpose bodily sensations that are uncomfortable and continue to do that over and over until they aren't so uncomfortable anymore. And then if the OCD uses that shot in the gut or that muscle tension, it's no longer feeling so overwhelming or surprising because you've practiced it and it's easier to deal with, actually.
Thank you. And also, it's a muscle. So the more you do all of these things, the more the larger your distress tolerance will become. Your more ability to tolerate the discomfort, and then the discomfort will become less and less as well. This for anybody that's watching with a kiddo. I think I have a feeling the way Jon and Patrick will answer will apply to everyone. Meredith Swain at 2:26 p.m. My daughter has OCD and we think she has scrupulosity OCD. She will say, quote, I accidentally did this. Is that okay? Do you forgive me? How do we apply ERP for an 8-year-old? So let's take it home, boys, so we can help all the kids that yeah, go ahead, Jon, you start.
Well, I can relate to this because I was like this as an 8-year-old, I think. I would confess a lot, and I would just get the thought in my head that maybe I had done the wrong thing or said the wrong thing, and thought it was important that I go back to my parents and check and make sure that, that this was okay. So, I mean, the first thing you want to do, I think an 8-year-old has the capacity to understand enough about OCD to know that there's something going on in the brain that's making her do something that she doesn't need to do, right? So you can externalize it. The OCD is telling me to confess or ask or get reassurance. And then as a family, you can work on, first of all, just identifying what's OCD and what isn't, and taking the risk that maybe something isn't OCD, but you're not going to ask anyway. Mm-hmm. And then you come up with a plan, right? Well, how will the parents respond to those questions? Maybe they'll say, honey, that's an OCD question, I'm not going to answer it. Or maybe they'll have a funny kind of built-in answer, to kind of not give the reassurance. But the point is to try to teach the child that being unsure is okay, right? It's just one of the experiences we have. And so if you're not sure about something, it doesn't mean you can't ask. But it doesn't mean you have to ask either. And you should have some curiosity about some of those experiences. Like, I wonder if I accidentally did this. Yeah, just go on wondering about it, because that's one of the skills you need as you get older, is the ability to just go on wondering and not get your answers.
I've also liked a worry journal in families. So if there's a question that's asked more than once, the parents will write the question down and then write down the answer to it. And then they'll just leave it on the dining room table. And if it's ever asked again, they just say it's in the book, and they don't ever discuss it anymore. And eventually the kids usually will wean off even going to look at the book, because they already know what the answer is. And so you're effectively getting them out of the conversation, because what does OCD want? It wants multiple conversations. It wants conversations over and over. And OCD hopes today you answer a little bit differently than you did yesterday, because then it can be like, wait a minute, yesterday you said this, but today you said this. Now you've opened up more opportunity for us to discuss, why was it different yesterday than it is today? How do you really know if it's right or wrong? Can I actually trust you? Now I have to call grandma and grandpa as well to get their opinion on the experience. And then it just wants to cast a wider and wider net. So if you do this book, you just have all the reassurances in there. That's it. We're not talking about it anymore. And eventually the book just fades away because they already know what's in there.
I think as a parent too, you always want to lead with compassion. I mean, you want to do that anyway, but especially in a situation like this, it might be irritating to be asked all these questions all the time. And it's perfectly normal that you might feel like, oh, stop with the questions. But if you're going to reflect anything back to your kid after asking a compulsive question, it should start with, man, it must be, really, really hard to be struggling with what you're going through right now. Like, I get why that makes you uncomfortable. I'm not going to answer this question because of our discussion about this is your OCD, and you can try to help you, bully back the bully. But sorry, you're having a hard time.
Yeah, and I'm always a big fan of just adding, and I don't know your whole story, Meredith, but obviously I don't know if you're working a clinician or a provider, but if your daughter has been officially diagnosed with OCD, and if that's the case, I'm a big fan of parents not having to guess. So if your clinician or provider isn't engaging you, the parents, in therapy, they should definitely be doing so, and it is okay to ask, especially with an 8-year-old. So I would ask questions like, how can we help her? What can we do? What are you doing with her? What does ERP look like? Also, ERP is not different. Well, I should say the treatment is not different regardless of the subtype, whether it's scrupulosity or harm, whatever. Yes, the ERP is tweaked to insert subtype or symptom there, but it's still exposure response prevention. So also try and take a lot of the pressure off you and your husband or significant other by trying to figure it all out yourself, and definitely lean on your therapist. And if you don't have one, you can always check out the IOCDF.org resource page and try to find some help in your area. Also, Dr. Patrick McGrath here is the big daddy at NoCD. I just said big daddy. That's weird. But anyway, which is teletherapy. And obviously teletherapy is a really advantageous thing right now. So
we're in 23 states currently, and we do have children and adolescent protocols as well too. So
absolutely. So you can download the app, the OCD app, for free on the Apple App Store or Google Play. So thank you, Meredith, for that question.
Can I, before you get to the next question, I just want to say one more thing about to Meredith about parenting. Most parents have moral scrupulosity, whether they have moral scrupulosity, OCD, or not. It's very normal, I think, as a parent to be very, very concerned about doing the right thing by your child, right? And there are not answers for all of the things that come up with your kids, so you have to do a lot of guesswork. And one thing that I think is important to remember when you're trying to reduce reassurance seeking with a child, you're the one who has to do exposure too. I mean, you both have to do exposure. So the child has to do exposure to this, like, I'm not getting my question answered. Maybe this means I'm a bad person, or I did the wrong thing. But the parent has to deal with that exposure of knowing, like, all I have to do is say the magic words and my child's going to feel better, right? Your instinct is always to make your child feel better. That's normal. And you're going to choose not to make your child feel better in that moment and watch them squirm. And your job as a parent is to be strong for them and sit with that uncertainty that, you know, maybe you're being too hard on them and maybe you're allowing them to be in pain, and that's wrong. But like anything, you can habituate to that too. And you can just bolster that by remembering this is how you beat OCD. You got to get rid of the compulsions.
Thank you, John. Kate, my friend Katie in Austin, 2:27 p.m. Can you talk about how values play into moral scrupulosity? Patrick?
Well, sure. I mean, those are going to, in many ways, help define what your morals are, right? So OCD will constantly be on the lookout. The radar is always going to see, was there a potential moral or ethical or violation there? Did I rule out one of my values when I made that decision? Did I not consult my values enough when I did that thing? And so the answer in all of those questions is probably going to lean toward the OCD being correct. You did not utilize your values enough when you made that decision. You did not make that enough of a value-based decision if we're looking at ACT types of things as well, too. So it's very, very common that would be the case, that you're never going to have been doing anything enough toward your values.
John?
I don't have much to add to that. I think that's right. I think that the one little part of where moral scrupulosity makes it tricky is that sometimes it leads you to believe, and one of the questions kind of alluded to this, that a behavior that's in line with my values is the compulsion, is the moral scrupulosity compulsion. I need to always be making sure I'm doing the thing that's perfectly in line with my values. There's an irony there, right? Because actually, it could be a very important and positive value to get better at being flexible with your morals, or to get better at being flexible with doing the wrong thing, because that might make you a better functioning person and easier to be around. Like Patrick was talking about, that you know, the person who doesn't have an opinion about anything and can never seem to help you, you know, pick a restaurant, right? That's a hard person to be around sometimes, right? So leaning into your values should be driven in, like, you know, living a more joyful and meaningful life. And sometimes that looks like, yeah, I took the last donut, you know, from the office kitchen and I liked it. And me leaning into my values is not apologizing for it, because I need to be better at not sweating the small stuff like donuts in the kitchen office at the office.
For sure. Yeah, I'm going to have to apologize for not getting to 45 minutes of questions, which we can always do a part 2 and answer these questions.
Happy to. For sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Michael Schramm, I see your question. He knows where I live, so I don't want him to.
Yeah, so he's a dangerous Michael. I'd be careful.
Yeah, Schramm's a tricky dude. Actually, I'm going to answer it one second. But, you know, Nancy says something that it's not a question, but I think it's worth bringing up, because from the reaction from a lot of people, including myself, in this discussion of moral scrupulosity, Nancy writes, sometimes, you don't need to post this, Fran, sometimes separating OCD into all the subtypes is very confusing, because for me, they all run together all the time. Sure. So we know in some cases, being able to connect with somebody, subtypes, is very helpful. If you and I have the same subtype, then maybe we connect. And at the end of the day, maybe some people know and some people don't know watching that, you know, the content of the OCD really doesn't matter. It's a way into exposure response prevention, but then at that point you can insert. But I will say, I think a lot of people, including myself, are sitting here having this discussion going, wow, moral scrupulosity really plays a larger role in my OCD than I thought it did. But for some people that may not be in maintenance or management and may already be feeling weighed down by their OCD, can we just talk a little bit about, I don't want people watching this to now leave going, oh my God, I got this another thing now on top of all this other stuff. It's all layered and I thought it was just this and now I got this on top of it. I don't want people to feel overwhelmed by this. So I just kind of wanted to bring that up. Nancy's comment made me think about that. And so, Jon, can you touch a little bit on like, how it's all interwoven, what we're talking about, and
yeah,
reassuring without not reassuring?
Yeah, I would say that it's definitely not another thing, right? So if you're watching this and you're going like, oh gosh, now I have moral scrupulosity on top of harm OCD, on top of this OCD and that OCD. Yeah, it's definitely not an additional liability. Understanding the moral component of what drives you to do compulsions is an asset. And the short version is, don't be so hard on yourself, right? Understand that being hard on yourself is part of the OCD, right? The door's not locked enough, the stove's not off enough, I'm not a good enough person. It's all part of the same OCD, and beating yourself up is feeding the OCD. So the takeaway here shouldn't be, oh, I have this additional problem. It should be, oh, I have more access to the ability to relate to myself with more kindness, with more compassion, and more objectively. I'm not the author of my thoughts. Not everything is my fault. This is my OCD. I can be flexible. I can do this. That should be the takeaway from today, I think.
I also like the idea too that it gives us a little bit broader area to look at ERP as well too. So not only am I going to do the contamination exposure, I'm going to do the guilt exposure also of what if the person is sick because of me doing the contamination ERP work that I'm doing as well. So I think it just gives us a few more angles to take a jab at the OCD, which I really like.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for addressing that. Also, as always, I encourage all of you to look through the comment threads. As always, advocates are advocating for each other, and there are lots of great comments and suggestions, people that asked about books or resources, other advocates or other people on board are answering those questions, so feel free to please look through. Michael Schramm, we are on you, buddy. 2:31 p.m. How does moral scrupulosity tie in with self-esteem? For instance, I have a fear of people not liking me.
I think they fit together amazingly well, right? I mean, if we might make the relationship of if I'm a moral person, then I'm a likable person. So the more moral I could be, the more likable I could be. And then the more likable I am and the more people that are friends with me, the better my self-esteem is. So therefore, I must always be moral at all times to be sure that I like myself, because I like myself based on how many other people like me, and other people like me based on their judgments of me. And the only thing they can judge is the types of decisions I made. So I better make good moral decisions.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah. I like that.
I'm in.
And my best friends are not always my most moral friends. I mean, look at Patrick.
Patrick's been looking down on us all day.
Yes.
Morality and likability are not the same thing. And morality and goodness are not exactly the same thing either. So, the fear of not being liked, I mean, that's a very common one in OCD and social anxiety. And the trick is to try to get to a place where you can entertain the idea that maybe somebody doesn't like you. And, maybe that's kind of cool, right? There's a possibility there that to be disliked by somebody means that you're important, or that you've affected somebody in a certain way, or that you've created great art, for example. Right, and somebody doesn't like your art, right? That's what art is, right? If everybody likes it, it can't be that. So that should be in your. I would encourage sort of in your larger treatment plan to kind of try to factor this issue in of not just letting go of the compulsions to make sure everybody likes you, but also starting to open up to the idea that being disliked, in certain contexts anyway, might not be an automatic negative.
Perfect, Jon. And we're going to get to one more question. I just want to say there's so many great questions going down. I'm already processing how we can answer them for you. I always say you can email me, but there's such great questions. Either we'll pre-record something where we answer the rest of your questions. I'll go through and copy and paste all of them into a document, or we can do a part 2. But if we didn't get to your questions, which I know there are a lot of them, I want you to know that we will answer them in some way. So stay tuned for that. I think I want to do a part 2 with Dr. Patrick McGrath and non-Dr. Jon Hershfield. MFT. Patrick is not an MFT. Do you lose your? Yeah, you're not. So, yeah.
I don't know what to do about marriage or families. I apologize.
Yeah, or therapy, really. All right. So I'm just trying to draw. I'm ERPing myself right now. I want to leave here knowing that Jon hates me.
You're gonna have to try a lot harder than that.
I know. So 31 p.m. This touches on a few things. This may put us over. It's a little long. So Carol Retner Fran asks, moral scrupulosity can interfere with my ERP. I constantly wonder if oh, good, we lost Jon. This is perfect. Let's leave this up. Jon's never looked better. I constantly
He's drowning.
I have the right to do my exposures to get well when I know there's a small chance. We're not laughing at you, Carol. I promise. We're locking. Okay. I know there's a small chance they could harm someone else. So now my original exposure has an additional layer. Any suggestions what to do? Sometimes I just wish my therapist would order me to do an exposure because it would take the blame away from me. He won't do it. Also, if he ordered you, it would still be your choice. So it would be your blame regardless. We can go ahead and drop that. We love Jon. But I think there's a few layers to this. So Patrick, let's start with you.
Well, if you want to have absolutely no chance of anything bad ever happening, I do this all the time in my Wednesday webinars with OCD. I ask people to send me the titles of their car because the likelihood is the most dangerous thing anybody does is driving. And so if your goal is to make sure that there's going to be nothing bad that's going to happen based on any action you do, the first thing anyone should do is just get rid of their car and never drive ever again. You'll decrease significantly the chance that you would ever bring harm to someone else. And this becomes the problem. So why pick on this just in the world of ERP? Why not take this to the entire level and recognize, hey, guess what? You do things on a daily basis that could be potentially harmful to people and don't give a crap about those things whatsoever. But now suddenly in this one instance, you're going to say, oh, I don't know if I should do this because what if it could harm someone, right? And it's another excuse that the OCD throws out to interfere with you doing the things that you need to do to make the OCD go away. That's what it is.
Love that.
I'm not laughing at you, Patrick. Jon, anything to add before you?
I often get asked to take responsibility for the exposures when it's scary for my clients. You know, they may do many of the exposures that I recommend, but they'll be doing it saying, Jon Hershfield says I have to do this, right? Which means they're not taking any moral risk. And, my favorite exposure that I think that I've ever assigned was I took a homework log and I wrote, do any exposure on it. And that was their homework for that week, because, for that particular person, without them coming up with what they thought exposure might be for them, it was always going to, however it would pan out, would always be either if it went badly, they'd be able to say, well, it's not my fault because, I was kind of forced to do this by my therapist. And if it went well, they also wouldn't be able to take credit for it because, well, I was just doing what I was told. I didn't actually put myself out there. So it's a natural instinct to want to hand over some of the responsibility for your ERP because it is scary. But the challenge should be to do the ERP and also lean into, this might be terribly irresponsible of me.
Thank you, Jon. Just to add a little levity to the end of this, and thank you for the question, by the way. We really appreciate it. Add a little bit of levity. Have to give a shout out to my friend Demasalaw. They wrote, I very much enjoy how much you bully Jon Hershfield. But then he or she spelled your last name wrong. Awesome. And then corrected it and wrote, sorry, my keyboard wipes you from existence too. So, and then the last thing, I was laughing earlier. I always like to be transparent. The way our friend Carrie here, the way it broke up, it says Patrick has the best examples of rabbit holes. And I was like, the way it broke it up, I was like, what? Oh, rabbit holes. And I'm like, oh, rabbit holes. Okay. I got
the way that OCD goes. Yeah.
Yeah. I know. I got nerdy, I guess, for a second. I was just thinking about other rabbit holes. So any last thoughts? On before we tie this up, Pat?
I'll just say this. OCD is the most conniving thing that I've ever had to interact with in my entire life. And I'm just always fascinated by new ways that it gets people to think about how they're doing something wrong and how they shouldn't do something, all because it's doing it under self-preservation, because OCD knows that if you do good ERP, OCD is going to diminish. And the last thing OCD wants is to diminish. So it's going to take any way that it possibly can to make sure that you do nothing whatsoever to diminish it.
Thank you, Pat. Jon?
I've been dabbling in evil for a few years now, and nothing happens. So just go ahead and let yourself be however you want to be. I'm kidding, of course, but I think that it's really important to understand, one, that OCD is, they say the doubting disease. It's the not good enough disease, right? And so looking at framing yourself as not good enough and always having to try to get to this, morally perfect place, that's just as much OCD as any other kind of OCD. And to, I hope that the takeaway from today's talk is that you can actually establish some real mastery over your OCD simply by identifying self-criticism, self-punishment, and forced investment in guilt and shame as compulsions. Simply identifying them as compulsions and stepping back and saying, "Oh, hey, look at that. That's the urge that's arising here." You can use that to master any kind of OCD. I mean, it's not alone on its own enough, but that can be a major tool in your tool shed.
Thank you, Jon. Well, as always, first of all, we have a ton of people asking for a part 2, so I think we're going to have to schedule a part 2. So part 2 coming at you very, very soon. Always a big thank you to our guests today, Dr. Patrick McGrath and Jon Hershfield, for being here. We love you guys, and you're awesome, and I know everybody else loves hearing your expertise as well. So thank you so much for being here, and I guess we'll see you next time around for a part 2, and we'll go from there. So just some quick housekeeping before you guys sign off. We definitely have an action-packed week scheduled next week, starting with on Tuesday, May 19th. We have a episode of Just Ethan, but I have a friend on with me, Thomas Smalley. So it's not just Ethan, but it is.
Isn't that immoral to call it something that it's not?
It's very immoral, but like Jon, I'm dabbling in evil. In fact, the name of my new book is Dabbling in Evil for OCD. But seriously, if you don't know Thomas, he's an amazing advocate. He's a sports health and fitness guru. He's an all-around amazing, I was going to say young adult, which makes me feel super old, but whatever he is. So we're going to be talking OCD, advocacy, sports and health, and how that affects mental health, as well as like training and exercise during COVID-19 and what you can maybe do at home, and what I need to do at home, clearly. Then on May 20th, Wednesday, 7 to 8:30, we're doing a town hall. We're starting an acceptance commitment therapy skills, volumes 1 and 2. So act skills to cope during COVID. We have great guests. Thursday, Peace of Mind will be hosting their Re-Engage series, Social Life and Work Environments, how to interact with your loved ones, friends, and coworkers. That will be Liz Mackingvale and a phenomenal guest, Ethan Smith. Very humble too. And then last but not least, I only want to go a week out. May 23rd, our next town hall. We will be doing a town hall for teens. This is for teens and by teens. We will have teens on the town hall. We'll have them on the town hall. So we'll be having Shira Folberg and Kyle King joining Lisa Coyne and Robin Zazio for some good discussion on OCD and teens. So you definitely won't want to miss that. So thank you for listening to my spiel. As always, I have to thank Fran behind the scenes for his digital voodoo. If you haven't already and you want to be notified for all the programs for the IOCDF over the next month, definitely be sure to subscribe and follow on Facebook and YouTube. You will get notifications and updates. I like this again. It reminds me of Mike Wazowski from Monsters, Inc., where we keep covering John's face.
Wait, I'm going to get it like right.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, perfect.
I like when the witness protection Facebook program.
Exactly. So follow, you'll get notifications. We're ridiculous. So thank you for putting up with our shenanigans. We hope that this helped. Any questions, don't hesitate to email IOCDF at yes, or me at just Fran's catching up, info@iocdf.org, or you can email me anytime at justethan@iocdf.org. Have a wonderful stay safe, stay vigilant, feel the feels, Feel the shame, feel the guilt, let it be there, make space, make room for it. Don't let OCD off the hook. And we'll see you next time. Thanks so much. Cue graphic. Boom. That was cool, but we're supposed to mute.